Hi, I'm Pam, and today I'm ranking some video games. Hello everyone, the spooky season is upon us, so I thought that this would be a good time to rank some horror video games. And horror as a genre is an interesting one to categorize games as, because it's about an atmosphere, a tone, the way it makes you feel, as opposed to most of the other genre rankings I've done, which are very much about how you mechanically interact with the game world. So a horror game can be anything. It can be a point-and-click adventure. It can be action. It can be traditional survival horror. It can be a cinematic platformer. So all of these genres can be horror as long as they mean to scare, frighten, or disturb you. So in making up the list of games that I wanted to rank, I did really focus on this. Games that have a primary or at least main objective of scaring or disturbing you. So there's a lot of games that have all the typical horror trappings, for example, the whole Castlevania series, but it's not a scary series. There's really no emotional impact to playing those games, so I haven't included anything like that. There are also a number of mostly zombie shooter games that I really enjoy. Left 4 Dead, World War Z, even the Dead Rising series, which I really like. And I feel like those are a little too action-y, a little too much of a power fantasy for them to really be scary. There may be some scares in them, but I don't really qualify them as a horror game primarily, even though they're about monsters. So having said that, what do I look for in a horror game? Honestly, it depends. Again, I like a lot of sort of subgenres of horror. The only one that I don't really like is a sort of class of games that have been quite popular in the last few years, and that is generally first-person games where you have to hide a lot. Just like hide from monsters, get jump scared, and then go back to hiding. Those, not my favorite, possibly because I'm just too wimpy to play them on my own, but there are a couple games that sort of fall into that category, and I will be ranking them accordingly as to how much I like them. But generally, I'm open to most type of horrors, and I really like a good atmosphere that just leaves you feeling unsettled and disturbed and thinking about the game after it's over. Alright, so I've got my ranking chart up now. I believe I have 60 games that I'm going to be ranking. You won't be able to see all of them, but they'll appear as we go along. And I'm just going to start off alphabetically, as I usually do. So the first horror game is Alan Wake. And Alan Wake is actually one of my favorite horror games. It is a fantastic sort of cinematic third-person action game. I really, really love it. It's got some great music, some really good set pieces in it. It does have a sort of corny aspect to it. It's about a writer with writer's block who goes away to a cabin with his wife, and his wife disappears, and all sorts of weird things happen. For some reason, every time he gets a gun, he loses it at the end of the chapter. But I think Alan Wake is a really fun game. Not super scary, but just scary enough with very shadowy, dark monsters and having to burn away their armor with your flashlight before you can shoot them. And I'm gonna give Alan Wake an A. Next up is Anatomy, which is a short little game by Kitty Horror Show. And this is about a house. You walk through this house in sort of first-person mode and find these cassette players which narrate some story to you. And it's very unsettling. I definitely had a sense of foreboding the entire time I was playing it. It's about a house, so it's supposed to be your home, is supposed to be where you're comfortable and safe, but Anatomy makes you wonder, what if the house doesn't really like you? Which is very effective, and I'm gonna give Anatomy an A. Highly recommend it. It's a short little game, but it's very, very effective. Then we've got Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of Orpheo's Curse. This is, of course, based on the Are You Afraid of the Dark television show. It's basically like a sort of standalone episode of it. And you play two characters who get trapped in this old theater belonging to this magician named Orpheo, and they're trying to get out. It's not super scary. I mean, it's really a kid's game. It's meant for kids, so I think it works for that. I thought it was a pretty good game. It's sort of a adventure-y, solving puzzles and things like that, and I think it's good. Again, sort of meant for children, but I'm gonna give it a B. At Dead of Night is another FMV game, which I tried streaming for a little bit last Halloween, and this is one of the games in the genre where I just don't really like the style. It's about sort of hiding from something that's after you, and I just don't like those hide and wait types of games. However, I did think it was really well put together. Like, it made really good use of the FMV combined with the sort of wandering around through this very creepy hotel. It's just not the kind of game I want to play, so I guess I'm gonna give it a C. Like, again, I think if you do like that particular subgenre of horror, it could be very effective for you. I just don't like jump scares and hiding, so that's why it's going there for me. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a sort of first-person, I don't even know what I'd call it. You're just going through this old building. You are, I believe, an animator or an artist of some type, and you go back to where you were doing this animation, and there's all this ink going everywhere. Everything is sepia toned, and you go around and you fight ink monsters and you do a bunch of fetch quests, and it kind of tries to be a little bit of everything when it comes to horror, but I didn't find it particularly worked very well. The map was sort of difficult to navigate, the combat was clunky and I didn't like it. The travel back and forth wasn't very fun, so I'm gonna give Bendy a D. I did not enjoy my time with this one. The Bunker is another FMV game. We're just front-loading the FMVs here, where you are someone who grew up in an underground bunker when something happened out in the world. You are now alone in that bunker, and you think, well, maybe you're not alone. So you're basically going around looking for items, trying to find out what's going on. I didn't feel like this was a particularly effective game. It seems to have high production values in terms of the FMV, but in terms of gameplay, there's not a whole lot to do, and I overall found it a little bit on the dull side, so I'm going to put The Bunker in C. So Cthulu: Dark Corners of the Earth was an original Xbox game. It is I'm pretty sure it's a first-person perspective. It sort of takes place in Innsmouth and Shadow over Innsmouth story, and you're a detective going to sort of investigate this town. And I think this game has an amazing opening. The sanity meter that it uses, the way you can tell when your character is losing it or starting to get hurt is really well done. The characters are all very grotesque and rather terrifying looking. Just the atmosphere is really, really good. However, I found that as the game goes on, it gets more action-y, and you're doing a lot of shooting, and you're doing a lot of stealthing around, and I found it just got less good as it went, and it never really... That's real loud. And I found it just got less good as it went, and I ended up falling off it after a bit. However, I'm going to give this a B. I think it's very, very good at being scary and using that sort of sanity meter, which so many of the Lovecraft games try to do. And now we have another Call of Cthulhu game. This one is much newer, maybe like 2018, 2019. And this one attempts to be a sort of adventure RPG. It doesn't pull off the RPG bit really at all. I didn't care for this. This and another one, which is under S, came out around the same time, and this was the one I liked the least. But the gameplay was a lot of stealthing, which I didn't find very enjoyable. The puzzles were just okay, and overall I thought the gameplay was just not my favorite, so I'm gonna put this one in C. So somehow I forgot to add an icon for the Cat Lady into this ranking list. The Cat Lady is a game I talk about a lot. It is the second game in a trilogy called Devil Came Through Here by Harvester Games, and it's about this woman named Susan Ashworth, who at the beginning of the game has attempted to kill herself, but she soon finds out that that isn't exactly possible, and a woman called the Queen of Maggots has a plan for Susan and is asking her to do some favors for her. And I really love this game. The combination of the visual look and the music, in fact, you've probably been listening to the OST from the Cat Lady for a while at this point in the video. Really good. Just like, I love how it looks and sounds. I really like the story and the characters in it, and the tone and the content matter is very, very dark and disturbing, and I really like this game, so it is getting an A. The Charnel House Trilogy is not so much 3 games as like 3 episodes of one game. It's a point-and-click adventure that uses lovely pixel art about some characters to whom weird things start happening. There's 2 main characters as you go through, and you sort of switch between them, and they end up on this train that is very strange. It sort of excels in the atmosphere department. Overall, it's a fairly quick and on the easier side, but I do really like the writing, and the atmosphere is very unsettling, so I'm going to give that a B. Next up is Clock Tower 3, and I remember I played this with a friend a long time ago. I mean, back when the PS2 was the current console, and you play a girl in an old mansion who's always being sort of hunted by these various monsters, like a guy with a giant pair of scissors. And it's cool in a cinematic way, like it has some cool cutscenes, some of the writing is fun. It does have hiding and a sanity meter, which I don't think works as well as the one in Dark Corners of the Earth. You sort of lose control over her if she gets too scared. But Clock Tower was fun. I'm probably being a little bit easier on it because I played it with a friend, which made it more fun than it would have been to play alone, but I'm going to give Clock Tower 3 a B. Next, we've got 2 of the games from the Dark Pictures Anthology, the slightly out of alphabetical order, but the first one that came out was called Man of Medan, about a group of maybe university students who go out for a dive out in the ocean. Things go wrong, they end up on a probably haunted boat, and it's one of those sort of choose your own adventures. It's made by the same people who did like Until Dawn and The Quarry. I didn't particularly care for Man of Medan. I didn't really like any of the characters. I didn't really like the story, so Man of Medan I'm going to give a C. A Little Hope was the second game in this series, and I did like this more. I thought the story and the characters were both more interesting. I also played this couch co-op, which made it a lot more fun than playing on my own, so I'm going to give Little Hope a B. Alright, next game is Dead Space, which I think is one of the best horror games out there. You are on an abandoned space station that has been taken over by these horrible creatures called necromorphs, which you have to dismember in order to kill. This, in terms of atmosphere and sound design, I think it's just like super, super good. It doesn't have much of a UI, and if you try to go in your menu, you're still never safe, so you're just constantly feeling in danger. I just love anything set in space. The sort of emptiness and the quietness of it always just sort of really appeals to me. And Dead Space is just a really, really fun and really, really scary game, so it's going to be the first S. Next up is Deadlight, which is one I was I didn't know whether this really belonged on here, if it's scary enough to be considered, but this is a sort of cinematic platformer set in a zombie apocalypse. You play a man, he's trying to reach his family who he's been separated from, and it goes from sort of the platforming, which I do really like, I think it's a good cinematic platformer, to sort of memories about his family and things like that. I'm gonna give this a B, I guess. I like this game, I've played it a couple times. Is it the most spooky? No. Detention is another adventure game. It is set in Taiwan in the 60s. Two students have sort of been trapped in their school during a typhoon, and a bunch of weird things start happening to them. It deals with a lot of like Chinese mythology and things. I wouldn't say it's outright scary, more disturbing, and definitely has more of an emotional impact in terms of what the characters are going through. I'm gonna give Detention a B. Doki Doki Literature Club is a visual novel. It attempts to be surprising. If you haven't played it, if you don't know anything about it, you might want to switch to the next game, because everyone says go in without knowing anything, but I didn't like this game. You play a guy who joins this literature club at school, which is filled with a bunch of anime girls, and you spend at least like 90 minutes just having vapid conversations with these girls before something happens and things get weird and try to shock you. And later on in the game, there are some things that I think it does fairly effectively, even though I've also seen them in other games before. But I just found it took way too long to actually get to the good part, and you shouldn't have to suffer through an hour and a half of bad writing in order to get to the scary bits. So I'm putting this in D. Downfall is actually the first game in a trilogy called Devil Came Through Here. I think that's what it's called. And it is a very disturbing adventure game. It is filled with violence and gore. There's no real characters to root for in it. Everyone kind of sucks. But at the same time, it did definitely keep my interest in terms of just sort of what's going on in this game and all of the sort of horrific things you're being subjected to. I'm going to give Downfall a B, because I do think it's quite scary and quite disturbing, and it did stick with me for a little bit. Next up is Dying Light, which, I honestly wasn't going to put this on here, and then I saw that according to the developers, they do sort of classify this as a survival horror. I feel like just having zombies in it doesn't really make it that. However, there are some nighttime scenes which can be a little scary. This is sort of an open world game where you're just doing a whole bunch of side quests and collecting things. I played it co-op with 3 of my friends, which is the only reason I got through the whole thing. I tried it solo and I bounced off it pretty quickly. But Dying Light, as far as horror games go, a C. It's just mediocre. The Evil Within is a really interesting one that is very inconsistent. It is a third-person sort of survival horror action game. As far as the story goes, I honestly didn't really know what was happening. It was a bit all over the place, but I really liked that it changed up what it was doing a lot. Like sometimes it was really classic survival horror, trying to not get found by big chainsaw men. Sometimes it was more of an action-y thing, like a Resident Evil 4. Sometimes it sort of combined things. Sometimes you were setting up traps or having big boss fights. And I really liked that it constantly changed things up. I did find that some sort of segments worked better than others, but overall it was a fun and spooky horror game, so it's getting a B. So Fatal Frame is a series that takes place in haunted Japanese villages. They use a camera obscura to fight ghosts. That's sort of the main gameplay of them. Fatal Frame 1 is good, it's scary. I do find it a little bit punishing in terms of just like the film and the health refills that you find during the game. But it's very spooky. It's just like spooky ghosts and spooky characters and fighting ghosts with cameras. It's pretty cool. I'm going to give Fatal Frame 1 a B. On the other side, there is Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly, which I find takes everything from 1 and just does it much better. Just the sort of shots and the fixed angles. Sometimes like a film grain will take place over the camera when something, like when a ghost is near. It's a very, very spooky game. I've played it a few times over the years, and I still think it's very effective at what it does. Still, in a group of many people on last weekend, people were screaming and throwing the controller when fights were happening. So I'm going to give Fatal Frame 2 an S. Fran Bow is another point-and-click adventure game. This is about a little girl who obviously has some sort of mental troubles. It's a bit like an Alice in Wonderland thing where she sort of goes from reality and travels into this sort of more surreal and, in this case, horrific world. And I thought this was a good game. It's not super scary, it's just more on the disturbing side of, finding out what's happening to this little girl who's, mentally unwell. And I thought it was good. I'm going to give it a B. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is yet another point-and-click adventure. This one is about a supercomputer named Am who has basically wiped all life off the face of the earth except for 5 or 6 humans who he's keeping alive just to torture. And the concept of it is quite terrifying. The execution in terms of the puzzles and things is only okay. But I'm going to give this one a B. It is quite disturbing, which I like, even if I found, especially towards the end, some of the puzzles a little too hard to solve. John Saul's The Blackstone Chronicles is an adventure game that takes place in a mental institution. I honestly don't remember this game all that well. I remember being a little bit on the dull side. And having not being a reader of John Saul, a lot of the stuff sort of went over my head, like any references or anything that would have been in it, any little Easter eggs. I'm going to give this one a C, just because I don't remember it being that fun or scary. The Last Door Season 1 and 2 are more spooky adventure games with nice pixel art. These are made by The Game Kitchen, who also made Blasphemous, which is a game I love. These are very, I don't know, they feel a little Edgar Allan Poe almost, maybe a little Lovecraftian. You're going through this world where just things are wrong, things are spooky. There's this veil that, might hold other things on the other side of it. I overall liked both of these games. They're fairly short, but they're good, spooky experiences, so I'm going to give both of these a B. Layers of Fear is a game where you're in a house. I forget the conceit of it, of a man who went crazy and killed his wife, possibly, or maybe that's just one of another 7,000 horror games. But you're going through this house, and as you're going through the hallways, things are sort of changing as you go and becoming more and more horrific. I thought it was a decent game. I feel like it's a kind of thing that gets done a lot, but I think it did pretty well at what it was trying to do in terms of having an environment that sort of changed as you explored it. Next we have Little Nightmares, which is a cinematic platformer. You play a little girl, maybe, in a yellow rain cloak as she goes through a number of levels, like through a kitchen where a chef is trying to catch her. There's a whole bunch of sort of horrific imagery in terms of any other characters you meet. Any of the adults are just like very scary looking. I found I liked the aesthetic of this a lot, and I found the gameplay was just okay, but I'm gonna give Little Nightmares 1 a B. Little Nightmares 2, I'm a little torn on because it's the same thing, it's cinematic platformer. I found that there were 2 specific levels in this game which were super effective in terms of the imagery and the gameplay. Like there was one with some televisions and there's one with sort of picture frames and everything sort of changing as you go through them. But then there was also 2 levels that I really didn't like and found the sort of combat or chase sequences in them not good at all. But I do think that those few strong ones do kind of make up for the annoying ones, so I'm going to give this one a B as well. Lone Survivor is an interesting one. It is a 2D pixel art game. It almost feels like a 2D Silent Hill. Like it's pretty classically survival horror, except that it's in 2 dimensions. You are a character and he's stuck in his apartment building and strange things keep happening and there are monsters in the hallway. There are different drugs you can take, like I think a red pill and a blue pill or something, and they each have different effects on what happens and sort of like what world you're going to be experiencing next. I found this was pretty spooky, especially just given the graphics. I still found it managed to scare me quite a bit, and I really liked just how it was put together generally. So I'm going to give Lone Survivor an A. Lorelai is the 3rd game in the Devil Came Through Here trilogy, and I played it not too long ago. It's similar to Downfall. It's not quite as dark as Downfall, although, I mean, I guess it is. It deals with both, typical horror things as well as just sort of down-to-earth horror, like abuse and things like that. It's got some very disturbing things in it. I really love the whole aesthetic of it. The art style is really good. The music is really good. I'm going to give Lorelai a B. Yeah, I think a B. Occasionally it gets to the point where like you're not really doing anything for long periods of time and just talking, but I do think the story is really good, and yeah, B. The Medium is one that came out fairly recently. It's set in Poland, and its whole thing was that there were 2 different worlds which you could experience at the same time on one screen. So you could be like in the real world and then this sort of dark world where everything's creepy and see both of those happening on screen. It was an interesting conceit. I didn't feel like it was used to the best effect. The story I found was just okay. The gameplay did get a little bit tedious after a while, especially any chase sequences that there were. I wasn't terribly impressed by the Medium. I can give it a C. Metro 2033 is a first-person shooter set in a sort of post-apocalyptic area. There is radiation, it's created monsters, people are mainly living down in subway tunnels in order to keep themselves safe. I think this was a really good and spooky game. I mean, it is quite action-y, but I found that it was often scary going through those subway tunnels. The sort of mutant monsters that you fight are very scary. And then there are also these like unknown Dark One creatures, which were also quite horrifying. You have to sort of scavenge a little bit for your ammo and health and things like that, which does keep the pressure on. And yeah, I think Metro is a really good one. I'm going to give that an A. The sequel, Metro Last Light, is generally better received, but I didn't like it as much. I feel like the more time you spend on the surface, the less good the game is, and I just felt like Metro 2033 really had you delving in those subway tunnels, and Metro Last Light tried to like bring you to other places, and It's still a decent game, like the gameplay is good, but as a horror game, not quite as atmospheric, so I'm gonna give that one a B. Obscure is a possibly multiplayer co-op survival horror game for the PS2 and other systems, and you play as 5 different high school characters trying to find out what exactly is going on in their high school because something's up to no good. And so I played this co-op. You each control a character. The characters can die, so if you lose one, you just have to pick a different one to play as. It is a little bit on the janky side. It is a little bit sort of teen movie-ish, but I thought it was all right. I had fun playing through it with a friend. Again, alone, probably wouldn't have liked it nearly as much, but I'm gonna give it a B. Observer is a sort of almost walking simmy adventure game. You play Rutger Hauer in this sort of cyberpunk world, and he's going through this apartment building looking for his son? Is that what's happening? Sorry, I tend to remember mechanics more than stories in most of these games. But he's going through this apartment building, and things are just weird and creepy. There's some bad stuff going on. I found the game pretty good in terms of the story and like all these little side stories in the different apartments. I did find they added some scenes, like some danger to the game, which I kind of felt took away from it more than they added to it. So there were a number of scenes where you had to sort of escape from something, and then if you failed, you had to go back, and like the more times you do something, the less scary it is. So I wish that they didn't have those scenes, then it would be much better, but I'm gonna give it a B because I do still think sort of the atmosphere is pretty delicious. Oxenfree is not a terribly scary game, but I have a thing about spooky radios that automatically just bumps up the scare factor for me. Oxenfree is about a group of friends who go to this island to have a party sort of at the end of school, and weird things start happening. Maybe there's ghosts, maybe there's something in the radio. It's got a very naturalistic dialogue system, which I really enjoyed. I'm gonna give Oxenfree a B. The next one is Parasite Eve, which I have reviewed on my channel before. I've sort of dubbed it as the perfect marriage of Japanese role-playing game and horror. It plays like a JRPG, but you're also more free-running. The combat is more sort of fluid. There's a lot of horrible monsters you'll be fighting, and a lot of really cool, really gross cutscenes that I still really enjoy watching to this day. I think it does scary well and disturbing well, while at the same time being in that sort of RPG wrapper, so Parasite Eve is an A. The Park is another sort of walking sim game. It's apparently based on The Secret World, that old MMO from a while ago. You play a woman who has lost her son in this theme park, and I don't think it's very good. It's dull in terms of both the story and the gameplay. Like, there's not a whole lot going on in terms of gameplay. The scares aren't really there. The story is pretty cliche, and I just did not have a fun time with the park, so I'm giving it a D. Pathologic 2 is a game that isn't outwardly scary. Like, it doesn't have those usual horror trappings, but it is very much a survival horror game where you are a doctor going back to your hometown after your father has died and a terrible plague has taken over the town, and you as a doctor only have so many materials in order to treat people of the plague, or possibly just leave them to die. And it's really good in the survival, sorry, Lily's making noise, in the survival set. It's just, the writing is fantastic, it looks really good. This was definitely a very effective game for me. And the scares, they weren't like the outright scares, it was just more like the disturbing, overwhelming sense of despair and futility, which I think is awesome. I'm gonna give Pathologic 2 an A. Phantasmagoria is an FMV point-and-click adventure game. I have reviewed this on my channel before. I think this game is boring. I don't think it's that good of an adventure game in terms of puzzles. I feel like the FMV sequences all go too long. However, there are scenes in this, because you're basically staying in a big house and you've let loose the demon soul of the man who used to live there and kill all his wives. And some of the scenes involve seeing how he murdered his wives, and they are disturbing. But other than that, I don't like playing the game, so I'm gonna give that a C. Phasmophobia is a multiplayer game, which really depends on who you're playing it with. I feel like as a game, it's not that great. It's very janky. It doesn't look very good. It can be scary with some sound effects. You're basically just going into these houses and trying to capture or film or record the ghosts in there. And I don't think the mechanics are very good, but with friends, it can be a fun time. So I guess I'll give Phasmophobia a B, I guess. I feel like that's being generous, but yeah, B. Next up is PT, which is the playable teaser for the canceled Silent Hills game. And PT, I'm just saying it right now, I'm giving PT an S. You wake up in a dark room, you enter a hallway, and you just loop around the hallway. And things change as you go. There are some radio messages. There is a ghost named Lisa who's just following you around or appearing sort of in the corner of your eye the whole time. It's very frightening. It's the atmosphere. It's like you can cut it with a knife. But the reason that PT is an S is because it leaves you wanting more, and it can't overstay its welcome because it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. But even if you still had it, it's this nice, concise experience. The problem with horror a lot of the time is that the ending is never as good as the beginning or the middle. Like, the ending is usually a letdown in some way. This doesn't end, which means it's basically perfect. So PT is probably actually the highest rated on this, but it's gonna sit with a couple other things. The Quarry is the newest game by Supermassive, who made Until Dawn, and this is about a group of camp counselors sort of on the last day of camp who get stuck there, and maybe there's something in the woods hunting them. I really like these kind of games, the sort of choose your own adventure, quick time event games with very much inspired by 80s horror movies. I really liked the characters in this one, and the writing I thought was a lot of fun. I didn't think it was overly scary, but I still had a really good time playing it both on my own as well as on stream with other people. I thought it was just a really, really fun game, so I'm giving it an A. Alright, next we've got some Resident Evils. We'll start with Resident Evil 1. It's honestly been a long time since I've played this, since it was new. I don't like tank controls, but with this one it kind of works with the fixed camera angles and, the dogs jumping through the windows, the weird intro cutscene. I think Resident Evil is fine. I think it's fine. I'm gonna give it a B. Resident Evil 4 is what I consider sort of my Resident Evil. It's the one I most got into. It goes more down the action route, but it still has some really scary scenes with especially the villagers at the beginning and the guy with the bag on his head with the chainsaw. I think that Resident Evil 4 is a very fun game. And it's also a little bit on the corny side, which I really like. I'm gonna give it a B still. As a horror, meh. As action, pretty good. But then we have Resident Evil Village, which I guess is Resident Evil 8, which I played last year, and I absolutely loved. It looks great, it plays really well. One of my favorite things about it is that there's sort of 4 different areas or 4 different baddies in the game, and each one has its own style. So like, one is more actiony, one is more sneak around, hear terrible noises in your headphones, have creepy dolls around. So it just sort of changes up every time you're like, okay, I've had enough of this. It like just changes into something else that's still a lot of fun. So I'm gonna give Resident Evil Village an A. Rule of Rose is a PS2 survival horror game. I did review it quite a while back, about a girl who is an orphan, and she finds herself on this airship with these other little girls who are all horrible little monsters and treat her poorly. It's a somewhat confusing story, sort of where you're trying to figure out what exactly is real and what isn't. All the time you have this dog, Brown, who helps you out in finding where to go and finding things, helping you fight. The combat honestly really sucks, but there isn't all that much of it. But it is a interesting and different one, especially in terms of the story and tone, so I'm going to give Rule of Rose a B. Sanitarium is another point-and-click adventure. You are a man who wakes up in this sanitarium, sort of unsure of how he got there or who he was before, and he goes through these surreal little areas, solving puzzles, trying to, just figure out what's going on. And it has some disturbing imagery. There's, again, like 4 major sections. I found the first 2 areas of the game really good, pretty disturbing, pretty spooky, and then the 3rd and 4th area of the game were very not. Like, they were just frustrating. They weren't particularly disturbing or scary. They just kind of felt a little bit tedious. So I'm going to give Sanitarium a C. Silent Hill is a game that I never finished because I'm too wimpy. As I mentioned, I don't like spooky radios, and every time that spooky radio goes off in Silent Hill, I'm just terrified. However, I think it's a really good game. It definitely influenced so many other games that would come out later on. Just the fog, the awkward combat that, means that you're just like an everyman. You're not a superhero Rambo type who can just kill everything. You're not very good with a gun. I do think Silent Hill is really good. Maybe one day I'll even finish playing it, but for now I'm gonna give it an A. The Sinking City is another Lovecraft-inspired game that came out around the same time as the Call of Cthulhu game I was talking about. This one is more of an open world game that actually treats the world in an interesting way, where there's no map markers. You kind of actually have to read the map and find the intersections to go where you're going. It's a detective game, so there's a lot of deducing and putting together clues, and all the while you're being sort of beset by these horrific monsters and visions and things you can't possibly understand. I liked The Sinking City. Again, not a super scary game, but I feel like it brought the sort of Lovecraft stories to life more than the recent Call of Cthulhu, at least. Slender, the 8 Pages, is, I'm pretty sure, a free short game. It's sort of primitive in its presentation. The graphics, are nothing to write home about. You're just in this outdoor area and you need to find these 8 pages. And as you go, occasionally, the camera and the sound will start getting weird, which means that Slender Man is near. So you're basically just trying to find these pages and not get caught by Slender Man. It's very difficult. I don't think I ever found all 8 of them, and it's it's very scary. I don't know that I would say this is a good game, but it was very scary when I played it. So I'm gonna give Slender a B. I'm apparently giving everything. Soma is a sci-fi horror game in first person. You play someone who's been in a car accident and you agree to have your brain scanned. Later on, you wake up in a facility Under the Ocean, and apparently it's been a while and the world has ended since you've been down here. Soma is a perfect game if you ever wake up and think, I would love an existential crisis today. Soma is the game for you. There's lots of thought-provoking questions. There's lots of disturbing imagery and disturbing choices to make. You'll come across characters that will make you feel real bad about things. And one thing I really like about Soma that they did was that there is a sort of monster that will chase you in the game, and you can sort of turn that off, so you don't need to worry about that if you just want to enjoy the really excellent story. So that I thought was awesome. I'm gonna give Soma an A. Stasis is another sci-fi horror game set out on a ship in space. This is pretty cool because it's basically a point-and-click adventure game, but it's got an isometric perspective, which is a little novel. You are a character who has woken up from stasis on this space station, where everything has apparently gone to shit. It looks like there's been a lot of murder and stuff going on. Probably monsters, probably some other terrible things. Your family is on the ship with you, so you're trying to figure out where your family is, what's happened to the ship, where you're going. I really liked it. I thought it was very spooky, and I liked the whole presentation of it. So Stasis is getting an A. Stories Untold is a cool one, a little hard to categorize. It is a game where in each chapter the gameplay sort of changes up. The first one you play is a text-based adventure where you go into this house and you have to like explore it, find what's going on, and then things change up into like almost a puzzle box room, and then another one is sort of like a walking simulator, while all the time you're sort of trying to unfold the story behind everything that you're being shown here. I think Stories Untold is really great. It's spooky, it's atmospheric, and again, I just love that the gameplay changes up so much. So A. Strangeland is a pixelated point-and-click adventure. You're a man who wakes up in a theme park, like a weird freak show kind of theme park, and you're basically just trying to figure out what's going on, what's happened to you. I liked the game, I liked the puzzles, the aesthetic was really cool. There's a hint system in the game, which I always love when there's a hint system, especially in adventure games. I did find it was maybe a little cliche in terms of what was actually going on, but overall I still enjoyed it, so I'm gonna give Strangeland a B. Until Dawn is one I've mentioned before. It is again one of those sort of choose your own adventure games, but you're like actually controlling your characters. In this one, you are a group of teenagers who's gone to a cabin far in the woods, and bad things start happening. You sort of switch between characters and you'll play each of them, each making decisions and interacting with each other in ways that will change the outcome of the game. I really loved Until Dawn when it first came out. I feel like it's been slightly eclipsed by the Quarry now, but I still think Until Dawn is an A. And there was a little Until Dawn spin-off for PSVR called Until Dawn Rush of Blood. This is sort of like, not a rail shooter because you're not shooting anything, but you're just riding a rail like a roller coaster through this area, and it is terrifying. I cannot keep the VR headset on my face for too long while playing this. However, I have watched other people play it. It's just really scary, and VR makes everything even more so. So I'm gonna give this an A, because it's scared the shit out of me and everyone else who's played it. Almost done. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. One where I was like, should I qualify this as horror? It's more of an RPG. But I think yes, based on a few specific scenes. The Ocean View Hotel is, I think, just one of the most fantastic horror experiences before that particular type of horror experience was really popular. And then there's some other, just scary things in sewers, or when you're tracking down this snuff film with like these weird little creatures. So there's enough spooky here that I think it works. First of all, if you know me at all, I just think this is one of the best games ever made, so it's good on that. And then when it tries to be scary, I think it succeeds in being scary, so it's getting an A. And last up is The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, which is a beautiful game. It's sort of like a walking simulator with some puzzles. You go to this valley, and you don't really get told what you're doing, but apparently you're looking for Ethan Carter. And it has a good atmosphere. I found from the very beginning of the game, like, everything's beautiful. Like, the sun is out, there are trees, but I still felt just like this feeling of like, oh no, something bad is going to happen the whole time I played it. As it went on, I found some of the puzzles were maybe a little lackluster, but the presentation and the sort of figure things out yourself aspect of it were appreciated, so I'm giving this one a B. Alright, so that is my final ranking. I think I've ranked 60 games here. Let me just make this bigger so you can see it. See the final of where everything ended up. We've got a few things in S, a good amount of A's, a ton of B's, and, nothing that, or not too many games that I thought didn't work at all. But yeah, that is it for that ranking video. Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite horror games are, if there's anything that you want to recommend to me, if there's anything you disagree with me on. Let me know if you try out any of these games based on this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. If you want to see more, check out one of my other ranking videos here. I have a Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.